Hello students, and welcome to Module 5 of our class, SOC241, Race and Ethnicity. As always, it's great to be here with you all today. We're just going to jump right in. I'm trying to keep these short, so bear with me, or wish me luck perhaps, rather, right? But this week we're covering immigration. Last week we focused in on social movements, what type of social movements exist, and how to go about researching social movements. And so you have the basis of your project kind of set up, and now moving forward, we're going to start moving into more specific topics that relate to race and ethnicity within the United States. Okay, so this week we're talking about immigration. Now, as your book will tell you, immigration is just the act of foreigners passing through or coming to another country with the intention to permanently reside in that country. And we can see this can be for many different reasons, right? Anything from like, we just feel like moving and we're seeking a new job, right? To it's not safe in my country and I need to find somewhere that is safe and seek asylum in that country, right? So all kinds of different reasons for why people immigrate. As you'll learn as you read your book this week, right? And as you're likely aware, especially since we live in Arizona, which is a border state, we do share a border with Mexico, of course, right, is that border issues are a hot topic within the United States. There's a lot of contention around border issues, particularly around the ideas of border security, and we can see that border issues often get tied up to different issues within federal legislation, right? So, for example, right now we're seeing funding bills, President Biden has a funding bill that would authorize $110 billion in federal funding for the war in Ukraine, the Israeli occupation of Palestine, among other issues. And right now it's going back and forth in Congress, with the Republicans saying that the bill doesn't go far enough to enhance border security, with the Democrats saying that they've already conceded on border security, and so they should just pass this bill, so on and so forth, right? And so what we really start to see here is that border security and border and immigration in particular go to shape policy in really important ways, and sometimes in ways that are not even that direct, right? For again, tying it to funding for the war in Ukraine and the Israeli occupation of Palestine, right? And so we can see that they play an important role here. You also may be familiar with kind of some of the issues that are going on in Texas right now. Now, Texas also shares a border with Mexico, and that border is along the Rio Grande River. And Governor Abbott in Texas has ordered barbed wire buoys to be placed along the Rio Grande River, which just means big river, right? To prevent people from crossing through the river. Now, at least 3 people, maybe more last time I checked, but 3 people have died trying to cross the river, and they've drowned and have been caught in these barbed wire buoys, right? And so President Biden told the state of Texas that they need to remove those buoys because A, they're not safe, B, immigration legislation and practices are typically reserved for the federal government specifically. And so within the United States Constitution, it specifically designates issues of immigration and border issues to the office of the presidency and Congress specifically, not to the individual states, right? And so President Biden and Congress are arguing that Governor Abbott has overstepped his constitutional rights in implementing this really extreme border policy. So the president has told Abbott that he needs to remove those barbed wire buoys from the river. He has not, and now what we're actually seeing is that I think it's 14 states have authorized their National Guard, their militias, to go to the state of Texas and help them enforce border security. And again, this is also something that would be potentially seen at least, as unconstitutional, because again, the the American Constitution says that immigration policy, immigration law is enforced by the federal government, not by state governments. And so when state governments initiate their militias, their National Guard, so on and so forth, right, to go to another state to enforce border policy that may be a violation of the Constitution, right? Of course, we're also concerned about human rights issues here, particularly if folks are, fleeing whatever country they're fleeing to the United States for asylum. Should they be faced with, dangerous buoys at the river, right? Or we might even ask, what are the driving forces that are causing people to take this risk to cross the river in the first place? And would it be more useful for us to understand the causes of this immigration rather than just to put up walls to try to prevent people from coming in, right? And so we want to think about, why is it that immigration has been such a contentious issue presently? But when we look back at the history of immigration, we can start to get some ideas about how immigration is often not as much about security as we think it is, or as it's positioned as being, but has a lot to do with our sense of national identity, our senses of who belongs in particular countries and who doesn't, right? Also having to do with, there's one other point I wanted to make about that. Oh, and citizenship, and who has access to citizenship and the rights of citizenship as well, right? And so one of the things that you'll be looking at this week is the history of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. It's about a 5 or 6 minute TED Talk on that. Very important to check out, and it definitely is going to help you with one of your questions this week. But what we see is that one of the things that's often talked about is that people will say things like, I'd be okay with immigration if folks would just come here legally. Why don't they just follow the laws, right? And what we find out is that those laws are really complicated, and often there's different quotas for people coming in from different parts of the world, and that those laws didn't always exist, right? And so people who might say, my family migrated here and we did it legally. Well, there may have been fewer laws in the past that enabled your family to migrate here fairly simply, right? So, for example, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was the first immigration law passed within the United States. And it very specifically, as you'll learn, limited Chinese immigration. And so you'll learn about the reasons why, right? And so immigration has a lot to do with, as I mentioned, our sense of belonging, our citizenship rights, sense of security, sense of national identity in particular, right? And so one of the things that I'm going to have you looking at this week is this cartoon, which is in chapter 3.2 of your Race and Ethnic Relations in the U.S. book. It's linked there, so you'll be able to find it easily, right? And I want you to take a look at this cartoon. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I'm just going to give you a little bit of historical background so that you can interpret this, because I want you to think about what this cartoon is actually saying here, right? So we have this cup. It says citizenship on it. You can see all kinds of different people in here. You can see somebody who, is probably supposed to be like the Statue of Liberty, Labor Liberty, right? And she has a spoon that she seems to be like mixing all of these people in, and it says equal rights. And then there's this guy over here with like a knife. He looks pretty animalistic. He looks like, he's going to stab somebody. He's all crazy or whatever, right? And he's got a green flag here. And so this is a cartoon that was published in a magazine, popular magazine. The cartoon is titled The Mortar of Assimilation and the One Element That Won't Mix. And so this comes out in 1889, and in the 1880s and even into the 1870s and 1860s, what we saw we saw many things happening in the United States, but one of the things that this cartoon is getting at is Irish immigration to the United States, actually, right? And this guy right here, you can see this green flag. He kind of almost looks like he might be a leprechaun or something like this, right? But he also kind of looks like a gorilla. This little guy right here is meant to represent Irish people and Ireland, right? And this is one of the things that helps us start to understand how race is socially constructed. Because when Irish folks were migrating to the United States in the 1800s, many of them were very poor. They were very working class. This is my family story, actually. Very poor and very working class. And they were fleeing Ireland because they were fleeing poverty that was brought on by British colonization. You might be vaguely familiar with something called the potato famine. Through British colonization, the Brits took control of lots of Irish land, and that the short version of it is that it eventually leads to a huge blight on potatoes in Ireland, and all of the potatoes become unedible. They all die, so there's not a lot of food left in Ireland, and this leaves many working class and poor people and peasants in poverty. And so to escape that poverty, they start coming to the United States. Now, when they get here, they are poor, right? And so Irish folks, I'm Irish, I'm very white, right? But Irish folks look phenotypically white, right? Like biologically, we would assume that an Irish person is white. But in the late 1800s, they were not considered white, actually. And they were actually considered to be more closely related to Black people in terms of racial identity. In fact, at various points throughout Irish immigration into the United States and Irish history in the United States, Irish people were referred to as Negroes inside out, meaning that they are just like Black people. They just happen to be inside out. And as we've learned, there are many stereotypes and histories of discrimination, enslavement, so on and so forth of Black folks in the United States, right? And so what we can really see here is that Irish racial identity was very much drawn into question in the 1880s. And so you can think about this. What does this image mean given the context of that, given the historical context of this particular image, okay? And then the other thing, let me go ahead and pull it up if I have it here. Yes, so the other thing then that you're focusing in this week is that you kind of got some work to do this week, right? Last week was a little easy, now we're picking it up a little bit. And so for question 3 on your discussion board here, we're going to be looking at Arizona's law SB 1070. Now, this was passed in 2010. Most of the provisions of it were found unconstitutional, I want to say in 2012, maybe, give or take a couple of years, right? So double check that for me. But this is often infamously, the legal name for it is the Support Our Law Enforcement and Safe Neighborhood Act. It's also known as the Show Me Your Papers Law. And so in 2010, the then governor Jan Brewer signed SB 1070 into law, which enabled and allowed police officers to pull somebody over, to stop them and question them and ask for their citizenship papers or residency documentation if there was suspicion of them being in this country illegally. Now, one of the tools that Arizona officers would often use to determine if there was suspicion if somebody was in the country illegally, when they would speak to them in Spanish. And if they answered in Spanish, then they would use that as a reason to check their citizenship papers, right? So we're going to look at a little bit of that history, and we're going to look at it through the lens of social movements. So this can help you think through how will I look at my social movements, right? And so the first one that I'm going to have you read is this article. My Spanish is mediocre, so bear with me. But vamos a aguantar. I'm sure I'm butchering that, but thank you for your patience. Observations on how Arizona's SB 1070 has affected one community by Celine Suzapinicki Quiorga. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My pronunciation is terrible. But you're going to read this article, and it's about how SB 1070 actually impacted the lives of people here in Arizona. Now, when I teach this in person, I often have students who remember SB 1070. They may have been very young, like, babies, right? Apparently this means babies. But they remember it because their parents took them to protest, right? Or they have direct experience with issues arising from SB 1070. So if that is your case, please be gentle with yourself as you're reading this. Take care of yourself, right? Sometimes there's difficult stories, and education should impact every part of us. Our minds, of course, that's obvious, right? But it might also impact our emotions. And when something impacts you emotionally like that, you're having a full learning experience and you're taking those issues really seriously. And so don't dismiss it if you get emotional. Also, if you get very emotional, take care of yourself first and foremost, always, right? And so you're going to learn about the community issues, some of the community issues here. Then you're going to go to the Puente Human Rights Movement website, where Puente was one of the main organizations fighting SB 1070 when it was first signed into law. And so you're going to look at their website honoring 10 years of resistance to SB 1070. And so here I'm going to see how you can identify how the needs in the communities ended up shaping the organizing tactics here, okay? All right, that's all I got for you today. I hope that's useful, and I look forward to your work as always. If you have any questions, send me a message, all right? I will see you next week. Bye-bye.